Welcome to the Building in Decentraland video series. These videos are recordings of the live sessions of the inaugural class offered by the VR Academy, which is a school within Decentraland University. My name is Carl Fravel, and I'm the instructor of this course. These videos are largely unedited recordings of the live class sessions. The descriptive text provided below this video includes information about Decentraland, a virtual reality on the blockchain, the Decentraland University and its schools, including the VR Academy, and the course materials for this course, including the lessons and assignments. I hope that you enjoy studying these materials and that they help you to become a very capable builder in Decentraland. Greetings.
Hey, Carl. How are you?
Good. Looks like we have 10 people on, huh?
Oh, do we?
Yeah.
I don't see anything.
Maybe you couldn't until I started the meeting, but
Oh, there we are. Okay.
welcome everyone. I'm going to announce now and at the end of the meeting, if I remember, I hope, that we need to use a different time slot next week and the week after. That's August 10th and August 17th. I'll post this later in the class channel too. We're going to start 2 hours later on those 2 days. I know it's kind of late for those of you in Europe, but I actually have previous commitments from some time ago during that time slot on those 2 days. So on August 10th and August 17th, the class will be at 8 to 10 p.m. UTC, 3 to 5 p.m. Central Time in the US. I'll try to remember to post that, announce that again at the end of the class, and I will definitely post it in the class channel. I'm going to share my screen. And go to the course. Can somebody confirm that you can see lesson 2 on your screen?
Yep. Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes.
I'm going to see if I can actually watch chat while I'm in here. Remember how to do that. That's how. Okay. Feel free to remind me or let me know. Thank you, Amber. To let me know if I'm not noticing a question. It's very fine print, as you can see. So if you've asked a question or you see somebody's not getting an answer, please let me know. That's fine. And I think this is going, if I click on this, it will go behind. Oh, no, it's good. It's always on top. All right. So, we are going to move on from our initial scene building using the Decentraland Builder to beginning to work with the SDK also. SDK stands for Software Development Kit. It's a common term in the computing industry for let's just say a collection or a library of code that's provided by a company, in this case, Decentraland, that you make use of in writing your own applications or scenes, in this case, on top of it. So the SDK provides methods and classes and things like that that you can call from your code for your scene that do things like creating a box or getting the position of an avatar's camera. The builder creates a software script, piece of software code in a file called game.ts that lives in a src subdirectory of the scene directory in the SDK. So basically the builder is building some default code for you to make the scene the way you've designed it in the builder. But once you have that, or if you make it from scratch, you can elaborate on your scene in the SDK in ways that the builder doesn't support, or at least doesn't support yet. So if you want to do more advanced scene construction, especially if you want to make it interactive, like you touch one thing and something else moves, touch a button and the door opens, or if you want to have sound, if you want to import images dynamically, things like that, then you're going to want to use the SDK. So this course is going to use the SDK heavily, and we're going to put our toes in the water today with it. Before I launch into the details, does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, let's go on. Feel free to stop me at some point if you have a question. All right, we're going to go through a little bit of background, some terminology, just to make sure you understand how certain things work. First of all, if you're used to using Windows or Mac as a, let's just say kind of a consumer user, you may not have up till now used the Windows command prompt or CMD window, or on the Mac, the terminal. Those windows are used to provide typed commands to the operating system. And you will be using them in this course. Most of the operations you do with the SDK use typed commands in your terminal or console window. So you will be wanting to learn how to use that. And then there are a few really commonly used commands when you're using SDK, such as how to make a directory, how to change which directory you're in, and things like that. Working with directories in the console window is sort of analogous to working with it in Finder or Windows Explorer. It's the same structure. You're looking at the same tree or hierarchy of directories and files. But it's in the console window, it's all text-based. You type a text command. You can do a directory using dir or ls in whoever's coughing could probably mute.
Sorry.
That's okay. I know you're live. I know that there's somebody out there. Anyway, so there's commands for looking at what directory you're in, what's in that directory, for changing what directory you're in, for making directories, etc. You're going to want to familiarize yourself with those a little bit. There's some basic important examples in here already. I think in every operating system we're talking about here, which is Windows, Mac, and Linux, if in the command line you type help, you'll get a list of commands. And if you type help and then the name of a command with a space in between, you'll get documentation on that particular command. So just be aware of that. In terms of installing the SDK, there's a fairly detailed instruction guide on how to do the installation in the Decentraland docs. I urge you to follow every step really closely. If you skip a step or do one of them incorrectly, you won't get the SDK installed. So just look at it very, very carefully and do each step. There's a step in their docs where they suggest you might want to install Git, that's G-I-T. You don't have to at this point. You will need it later in the course. The first time you when you install Git, you work through a little wizard during the installation. And one of the things it asks you is, what text editor do you want to use when you check things in? Git is a repository manager for your code. It allows you to keep track of versions of your work. You can go back if you want, kind of undo, go back a version. You can also push your code to the cloud. We'll be talking about that all in a later course. But since the Decentraland instructions mention that you might want to install Git, I mentioned here that before you do, you want to identify what kind of little lightweight editor you want to use, because when you check something into Git, it'll ask you for some comments on the changes you made. and it'll open up your default editor that you indicated when you installed Git. I use Notepad++ for Windows. It's a little bit richer in its capabilities than regular Notepad, although I believe you could use Notepad. On Linux, typically you might use Nano, which I think is usually installed in some Linux distributions. Otherwise, you can install it. Any questions on any of that so far?
Hi, what would you recommend for a Mac?
Somebody else in this class might have a better recommendation than me, especially anybody that's done any work with Git or editing on the Mac. There's probably a lightweight editor. It might be the built-in editor. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a text app on it that comes with it, and I'm just wondering which one would work. And I've used Atom before. I've used Atom. So.
Yes, I think, correct me somebody if I'm wrong, but I think the way to tell whether it would work would be to go into your terminal app and type on the command line a command that you think would start that editor. And if it does, then I think that will work. If it starts the editor up from the command line, then I think it'll work fine when you give the name of that command to
that. Okay, thank you.
Yep. If somebody else wants to put a comment in the document later, if they figured out how to make that work at any point, that'd be great. Any other questions on what an SDK is, why we use it, installing it? Some of you may have already installed it. This is, there's a number of lessons here that involve things that people have maybe never done before. And I would encourage you to ask questions if you seem to be stuck in the class channel. And I'll try to answer them. There's others in the class who probably can answer them, maybe sometimes before I do, and you're welcome, encouraged to do that to help each other. So, okay, moving on. Decentraland runs on the blockchain. The parcels of land are represented by non-fungible tokens in the Ethereum blockchain. And when you are logging into the world or into the preview in the SDK where you're actually opening a browser and looking at your scene, the first time you open a browser in a session, you will be asked for your Ethereum address, and you'll supply it using a browser plugin called MetaMask. There are some other ones that can do the job. MetaMask is very commonly used and referred to often in documentation or chat windows, etc. So I recommend it. It works well. The reason why you're asked for your Ethereum address and supply that by logging into MetaMask in your account is that there are scenes in Decentraland where you have to confirm something. You'll have to confirm your address when you upload to your land in the future. Sometimes in some scenes you might be able to donate mana or Ethereum or purchase something in world. So it needs to know what your account is when you log into the browser. You will always be able to decline a signature or a payment if your MetaMask browser plugin pops up and asks you to make a payment and you don't know why it's asking that, just decline it. I would not be surprised that there will be people who make scenes in Decentraland that are basically phishing attacks. So just be thoughtful. Don't sign or pay for something unless you know what you're doing. But you will need to sign into MetaMask with an account when you open up the browser on a scene, including in the preview. At least the way it works right now in the SDK. Even though you're not really in the world, you do that. And that's useful for if you are developing a scene that makes use of the person's Ethereum account, you're going to need to test it with your own. So there's a link there for how to get to MetaMask. It's a plugin for Chrome and Firefox. probably works with a Brave browser too. I haven't tried it myself, but it works with a few browsers. And you're going to need it. So you install it. And if you have not already created any Ethereum account, then when you open up MetaMask, you're going to want to say, yes, create an account for me. And in doing so, it's going to give you, there's two secrets that you're going to have to record. One of them is a password you'll use every time you log into MetaMask. And the other is a 12-word phrase that they provide, the MetaMask provides to you, and you need to keep it recorded in a safe and secret place. You'll need that if you ever start over with a browser, go to a different computer or something. You'll need those two secrets in order to reestablish your connection to your Ethereum account in the new context. So follow their instructions, record your password and your 12-word phrase really carefully. If you already have an Ethereum account but just haven't used MetaMask before, you'll still go through that process. But then after doing that, I think by default, you always create a new account in MetaMask when you start it. Maybe there's an option to skip that step if you already have a 12-word phrase. If you already have a 12-word phrase, you just put it back in. Otherwise, you can also import foreign accounts that you made somewhere else. You can import them into MetaMask and use them. You just need to use the secret key from that account to do that. This is probably all new to some people. Again, you're going to probably have questions. Don't ever post your password, your secret keys, or your 12-word phrases into chat. Don't ever share them with me or anybody else. Your public address of your accounts is it's public anyway, but if you wanted to have somebody pay you, you would give them your public address. That is not secret. Any questions or suggestions about the topic of Ethereum and MetaMask at this point?
I actually had a question. If I were to use, because I know I've already purchased some land, but I was using my ledger. MetaMask, is that okay to still like be able to connect to the account if I wanted to build on that land and using instead of the MetaMask, just using my ledger?
I am not sure. I don't know that you can export the secret key from your ledger to put it into MetaMask in order to import that account. That's what you would have to do. And I think Ledger is kind of finicky about, like, they're not wanting you to export the secret keys because suddenly your Ledger protection is gone.
Yeah.
So you might find that to operate on the land, you would transfer the ownership of your parcel to a different address while you're working on it.
Okay.
There's also a more advanced topic. You can set an operator, a land operator account into, you could, I think you could do that with Ledger and then set it, it's a separate account that can write to the land but doesn't own it. So not at the level of this assignment, but later on we might stick a little side topic in on how to do that. But I have written up some documentation on that. Maybe I'll take a note here to okay. Any other questions? Okay. Let's see what. Yes, we will be installing Visual Studio Code in this lesson during the assignment. It's not the only editor you could use to edit the scene scripts, but it's the one that I'll be referring to. It's the one I'm familiar with. It's really a really nice one, and it runs on all 3 operating systems. So I recommend it. And somebody posted the link there. It's a free version, a simplified free version of Microsoft Visual Studio, but it is actually capable of running on all 3 operating systems, and it works really fine with TypeScript, which is the programming language in Decentraland. So I highly recommend it. All right, so I'm just going to walk through the assignment and we'll talk about it a little bit. I'm not going to demonstrate it, but I'll just walk through it. First of all, you want to install MetaMask, and the link to it is just above the assignment here. And again, keep your password and your 12-word phrase and any secret keys you have for any of your accounts, keep them really safe and really secret. If you put them someplace, if you keep them on your computer and your computer dies, you're in trouble. If you put them on a different computer, well, if your house burns down, you're in trouble. So I recommend that you put them someplace essentially elsewhere than your residence. It's often recommended that you don't store them in the cloud, and I sort of disagree. I just think you want to encrypt them very carefully and put them in a private account somewhere on the cloud. I think it's a very good solution. But you don't just put them up in a public place. You don't put them up in like Google Docs or OneDrive or something without encrypting them. So you could, for example, put them in a Word document and put a password on it, then put it in a place in Google Docs or OneDrive that only you have access to. That would be an example of secret and safe. I suppose you could also put them on a thumb drive and put it in a safe deposit box, something like that. The reason is because you eventually are going to have value in there. The value of the land that you own, the value of Ethereum or Mana or other tokens you may accumulate, any inventory that you acquire as Decentraland makes it possible to get hair and clothing and accessories up for your avatar. Things like that will be associated with an Ethereum account. You're going to want to not lose it. So be real careful with it. If you're not sure, ask questions. Go read. Inform yourself. So after you've installed the SDK, you're going to create a working directory. A working directory is just a directory on your machine that initially is empty, and that you then use the SDK to initialize a scene in it. The scene will have just some boilerplate or default code. It'll have a spinning box in the scene. It'll be a one parcel scene. That's the default scene. You can modify that scene, or you can replace it with some of your own content and build out from there. So typically you're going to make a directory somewhere and then operate on it, in it, at the command line. I end up going back and forth between three different kind of environments a lot while I'm working. One is the command line where I'm doing SDK commands. Another, and maybe creating directories sometimes in there. I use Windows File Explorer, which is Windows Explorer. In Mac, you'd use probably Finder to look around through my directories in a more graphical way. And the third tool you'll use a bunch is Code or Visual Studio Code to edit the files. And I put a little tip and hint at the end of the lesson here about some really easy ways to get back and forth between those environments, because otherwise you'll, 10 clicks or something to get around. It's a lot faster with those tips. Okay, so the Decentraland documentation, I will go ahead and open it here. It's at docs.decentraland.org. If you forget docs, you just go to Decentraland and click on the docs link. I would suggest that you just scan through this, at least through the table of contents. It expands like this. What you'll be using in this lesson is the installation guide to install the SDK. And it looks like this, right? A lot of steps, kind of like my instructions. I'm going to point out that you'll need to install a prerequisite to the SDK called node.js. It is the SDK of the SDK, you could think of it that way. It's an industry standard platform for writing JavaScript and running JavaScript and getting JavaScript libraries from the cloud. And you will be using it a lot. The command you'll be using from it is npm, which is used for installing or updating the SDK. And the SDK runs on that platform. So you'll have to install this, use at least version 8. This thing keeps moving. So later versions, I believe, work fine, but not anything before version 8. Once you have that installed.
Hey, Carl?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I tried to install version 8. When you click on that, it goes to, I tried to do this whole install of the Node.js and the CLI, and it doesn't open a scene. So maybe if you can go through this to see what I did wrong, because
well, one of the things is that they have a bad link in their docs. So their Node.js links goes to the CLI. Okay, so if you click there, but down in the README, I think there's a correct link.
Well, there's if you go to where is it? Getting started, I think. Oh, let me see that. Is it home? Okay, on the home. If you click home on their web page.
On their web page?
Yeah, go to home. Down the first link there.
Thank you.
Now, what I found was now if you scroll down, there's a link to, I think it's here, where it says, and let me find it. Okay, if you go to installation guide, under getting started, it says Decentraland CLI is distributed via NPM. And if you click that.
Yes, there it is.
Okay. Now, is asking for.
Wait a second. That's.
Is that not where I'm supposed to?
NPM is a command within the Node.js package.
All right, so this is installing both of these things, the Node.js and the NPM.
That's correct.
Right? Okay,
yes.
So
let me just go see what this happens. I'm going to click on this download node and see what I get. Yeah, they're up to version 10 now.
It doesn't matter what version we use.
I would use the long-term support version, LTS version that's latest.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be version 8 the way they state.
No,
okay.
Yeah, it can be later than 8. I believe I have 10 installed in mine.
Okay, so I installed this.
I probably wouldn't go with 12.7 because that means they put the latest features in, and there's probably some bugs in there too.
Okay, I installed the 10.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which is okay because I couldn't get 8 to install. So it installs. I'm installing it now, and then I put in the commands that they asked for. But the problem I have is when it says, well, open up a scene, to see what your scene is. So I'm expecting this box, the rotating box, and I get an error. So I don't know if there's a step that's missing.
Did you do a DCL init in a working directory?
Well, I followed their instructions exactly, and there was an error. So I suspect that there's some kind of missing step.
Yeah. Do you? At some point, what we should do is look at the error you're getting, and it may give me a clue.
Well, if anybody who's following this exactly is going to get that error, because I don't do any of this stuff, and I followed their instructions exactly the way they said, and I got an error. So if they're missing an instruction line, they should probably go back and put some instruction in there for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing.
I'll try to see if I can find a computer that doesn't already have it installed.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let me mute, and I'll tell you. Let me see. Well, it's just the 2 commands, right? So let me go to.
Once you have a working directory, if you type DCL init, do you get what appears to be a successful creation of a scene?
Well, I have to install this. It says now the next step after doing that is to do an npm installed -g Decentraland, right?
Yes. The npm is used to install the SDK. What that line that you just described there is what installs the SDK. It uses the npm command in Node.js to do that. And it should, the -g says install it So I can use it anywhere in any directory. Let's install it globally. So you definitely want the -G when you're installing the Decentraland SDK.
Okay, so I'm trying. I mean, if this is, I think I don't know if anyone else is having issues with this because if this,
I have seen people have issues with it, but the vast majority of people do succeed if they go through the steps. So you're on a new path here because you're using a new version, a different version of Node.js now.
I'm trying to find out where they put this. Oh, there it is. Okay.
It's worth taking a little time to sort this out because this definitely can hang people up.
Okay, so now I install, and that worked well. Okay, so I had that working well.
What, the npm command or the
Right.
installation of Node?
The installation of Decentraland's
Okay.
CLI.
All right.
So the next command is DCL init.
Yes, and you want to do that in an empty working directory. You don't want to do it just wherever you happen to be. You want to explicitly go create yourself a new directory somewhere.
All right, so that's the line they're missing because they're saying, okay, do this in this order, and they don't tell you to create it. I mean, I guess maybe it's obvious to somebody who's done this.
Yeah. So my instructions talk about how to create a working directory and my recommendation about where to put it. My suggestion is that in Windows, you put it in your documents directory. Excuse me, let me back up. You're going to want to start in your home directory, which in Windows is called My Documents, and in Mac or Unix it's when you log into the terminal, it's the directory you're in.
All right.
And I would suggest you make a DCL subdirectory there, and then go into that and make a directory. Each time you want to make a new scene, you make a directory under that DCL. That's just one way to organize your scenes. But you want to be in an empty directory, which is where you want to build your scene, and there's nothing else in it when you start. So, and once you're in that directory at the command line, you type DCL space init.
Okay, so you do the directory before the init. Okay.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Okay.
You have to be in the directory that you want to do this in, and there shouldn't. If you do a directory in that dir in that directory, you should get no files, no directories showing. Otherwise, you're going to be mixing up all your scene stuff with some other like documents you have or something. It'd be a mess.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't even know what these commands do, so I guess you know I'm kind of like the perfect example of somebody who doesn't know anything. So I'm trying to follow these instructions, and they're obviously written by somebody who does this every day, and they've left out steps that are obvious to them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, which is why I've tried to detail some of the stuff around it. Also, just be aware that most of their team uses Mac at the command line. So basically they're using a version of Linux that runs on the Mac, or Unix that runs on the Mac. Whereas I think a lot of users, probably half or more of the users, are on Windows. So early on they had a lot of bugs in Windows they didn't have in the Mac, but they seem to have fixed that. They have enough testing going on in Windows now that Windows is pretty stable. Seems to work as well as the Mac version. But yeah, it's easy when you're used to doing something a lot to forget a step that a newcomer would not know. So you want to be in an empty working directory. Have you done DCL init in an empty directory now, Rob?
I'm still getting there. So, okay. So if that's what you think that is the issue, then let me get to, because I got to type all this stuff in.
Are you on Windows?
Yeah. Okay. I have to remember those commands here.
In the instructions, I've used mkdir for making a directory. On Windows, you can also type md. CD works in all the OSs for changing directories into a different one, to go like navigating around in your directories.
Okay, I'm almost there. Yeah. So,
DCL init will throw an error if you try to run it in a directory that isn't empty. That's probably the error you were getting.
Well, that wasn't the one. The DCL init worked. It was the next one.
Okay.
When I tried to start, it had an error. So let me do that.
Okay.
So type. Let me see. I'll do the start now. It should be.
You've already done the DCL init and it worked.
Yeah. Okay.
So when you type DCL start,
it
starts up a little web server on your computer that serves up that scene. It also does a build of the scene to convert the TypeScript to JavaScript. These are technical details. And then it opens up your default browser pointing at your scene on your computer. It points your browser at the little web server that's running on your machine.
All right, so now I get an error. It says an error occurred while running Unity content on this page. See browser JavaScript console for more info. The error was an uncaught reference error. So this is, let's see here.
Do you know how to open up the console window that they're talking about on your browser? This is actually a skill that you're going to want to have. It is sometimes helpful when you have a problem with the scene to look at the browser's debug console. All browsers have them. On Chrome, you open it by hitting the F12 key. For example, I'm going to hit the F12 key here on this one, and this window on the right opens up. And this tab up here called Console shows you error codes and other things that come out of the loading of your web page. This page has no error codes, but if you go into a Decentraland scene, you're going to see a lot of stuff there. Maybe I can do that here. I think I have a scene that works here.
It looks like it might be working now. I just closed the browser and cleared everything and then redid it.
Yeah.
It looks like it's happening.
I just did a DCL start on my machine, and if I open up the browser, the console here by hitting F12 on the scene, you see all this stuff coming through as the scene loads. I mean, this much stuff happened because of the scene loading. And all the white stuff is pretty much fine. If you see a red stuff, it might be worrisome, but there's certain ones happen. It's on them. They have a little error they haven't fixed, but it's not hurting anything. The stuff that's important is from the word start preview on down. If you see an error in here below starting preview, then it probably is an error in your code. Did you get a scene popping up, Rob?
I did, but is that your scene? What is that? Is that the default scene? Or is
No,
that
that's not a default scene. Here, let me do it. Let me create a default scene here. Let me close this.
Because I have a cube here floating.
And rotating?
Yeah. So am I to assume this is the latest version of the SDK 6.0?
We're actually at 6.2 point something now.
Okay.
Yes. I'm going to show you some. Here's the window that I did the DCL start in. You can see DCL start right there. And it's now running a program. It's now running a program called, I don't know what they call it. It's the SDK preview program. And like I said, it's a little web server on your local machine that serves up your scene. And it's running. Even though I closed the window, it's still running. If I open up the window pointing at the same URL, the URL is indicated here, like that, or the line above it. If I open a browser on that, I'll get the scene back again. It's still running. But if I want to stop the scene and do something different, I go into this window, hit Control-C, and it says, terminate the batch job, and you say yes. And now you're back at the command line. So if I go to a new directory, make a directory called test, that could be mkdir also, and then change directory into test. Now I'm in an empty directory. All it shows is just the dot and two dots. That's normal. There's no other content here. So if I say DCL init here, it's installing another package that's part of the SDK, but is local to this a folder. and is creating a default scene. And now if I do a directory, there's a bunch of content here, including a whole bunch of library code for the program that's down in the node modules. The important two files in here, and you're going to become familiar with them over time, are scene.json, which says what parcels the scene would run on. By default, this is a one parcel scene at 0, 0 coordinates. And if I change directory into the src directory and do a directory there, I'll see the other really important program file in here, game.ts. I have Visual Studio Code installed. So if I say code game.ts here, it'll open up Visual Studio Code. I had some other things that I was working on, but this tab here is, this is the boilerplate code. And basically it creates a cube and it creates a rotator for that cube. We're not going to go through the text on this right now. But if I go back to the folder here, back to the console and type DCL start, that's the preview command. It says I want to see the scene. Oh, I'm in the wrong directory. I'm still in the source subdirectory. So I changed directory. The 2 dots means go up a directory. DCL start. Up comes a browser. That's the Unity logo. That's the Decentraland logo. The scene's loading. I'm going to hit the F12 window just for fun, key just for fun, so you can see the console window coming up. Click on the scene, click and drag, and I'm looking now. I'm going to hit the W key to walk forward. And here's a spinning box. This is the default scene that DCL init creates for you. And it has a little bit of behavior because if you start clicking on the box, you get more boxes showing up. There's another one here somewhere now. Maybe it's hiding behind one of these others. Oh, excuse me. There's the cursor. It's very fine and hard to see. If I click on it, it gets bigger, and I add more random boxes, all of which are spinning. That is what this scene code does that you get by default. You can use the default scene to change the scene. And that is the part of the assignment here. So if I go code, I'm going to open up the game.ts file. So I can reach down into the subdirectory like this. Actually, on Windows command line, you have to use backslashes. Everybody else in the world uses forward slashes, including inside the game.ts file. But source game.ts. So I'm invoking the Visual Studio Code program, and I'm using it to open up the game.ts file in the source subdirectory. It's the same one we had open a moment ago. And I will now just very quickly walk through here and show you what this default code does. First of all, it creates a what's called a rotator system. And that is the this function gets called, this update function gets called by the SDK, the runtime, calls back into your program every 30th of a second, 30 times a second. This gets called. And in here, they're doing a rotation of the cube. They're taking this is the amount of time since the last time it was called, and it's multiplying that by some small number and rotating that as a degree angle change. My cat. I'm sorry about my cat singing, but that is a cat. Anyway, so it also spawns a cube, and it also adds a click handler that says if somebody clicks on the cube, you spawn a new one in a random place. So, for example, if I want to maybe make the initial cube bigger. I would, or put it in a different place. Let's do that. That's probably easiest. The spawn cube for the first cube, I'm scrolling up. The first cube is instantiated where? Spawn a cube, spawn here, right there. That's the initial cube. And the parcel is 16 by 16, right? So it's putting it, this is X, Y, Z. X and Z are the dimensions on the ground, east and north. And it's also one meter up in the air. I'm going to put it closer to the southwest corner of the scene by changing those two parameters. And I do a Control S to save it. I come back to the scene here and I just simply reload it with a Control F5 key. Except I stopped it, right? I'll get an error in the browser because it says it can't be reached because I stopped the server. So I just do a DCL start here again. And it'll pop open a new window pointing at it, which means I can close this window. It'll open up a new one. Now the box isn't over in the center of the scene. It's over here near the corner.
Hey, Carl.
Yep.
Could you go over what the, so you say 8, it was initially 818. So you said that was XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
X is on east and west?
Yes. Y is up and down. Z is north-south.
South. Okay.
So let's kind of look at this here. The scene.json tells you how many parcels your scene is going to be and where they are. And by default, you get one parcel when you do DCL init. And here's it puts a grid on the ground a little bit above. Actually, let's back up a little bit and here, look at this. Do you see how this gray grid is sitting up above this other grid that's worldwide? Well, they're both actually slightly below the ground level. The gray grid fills the parcels of your scene as you specified it in scene.json. And it sits, I don't know, a few centimeters below the actual ground level. So when you put a ground cover on the scene, it hides it. And then this worldwide grid is another maybe half a meter below that. It's a little ways down. And you never see that when you have anything in the scene. This cube is floating up in the air a little bit. And if you look at where it is, it's 2 meters. Oh, the origin of the scene, all the sizes and measurements of the scene are from the southwest corner here. And when you first come in a scene, you're facing north. It's kind of useful for knowing your way around. You're always facing north when you first enter a scene. So that's west, right? And that would be southwest, which is where the sun is. So if you get lost, you can navigate by the sun. Just find the sun in the sky, you put it in the center, and you just look down, and that's southwest. So that would be west, that would be northwest, that's north. And you spawn at the southwest corner of the scene you're going into. Normally, that would be the normal place where you spawn. So if I go right here, this is where I was when I first came in the scene. And there's your spinning box. And now if I click on it, it gets thinner in one direction and longer in the other and creates me these other boxes, all of which are also spinning. That's just what the game.ts file does, those things. It spawns an initial box, it rotates it, it detects clicks on the box, and for each click it creates a new cube in a random place and adds it to the list of cubes that are being rotated. I'm going to walk through the code again once more. This is not the simplest initial scene you might have. The simplest scene would be like nothing in it, right? There's this part here sets up a process that's going to rotate every cube in the scene. It gets called on the update method. It's a standard method in a rotator or in a system that gets called by Decentraland 30 times a second in any scene that has this structure in it. It gets called. So you can use it to update things over time. You can, have something gradually crawling across the screen or something like that. And so in the update, you can do what it is you want to have done. And what it's doing here is just going through every entity that's been created, the initial cube and any others, and it's rotating them. And then after defining this rotator system, you're adding it to the engine so that it'll be called. So its update method will be called. And then there's a function that simplifies the spawning of a cube because there's a number of things you need to do to spawn it something. So they put it into a function, so you just call it once right here, and it does all that stuff for the new cube, the center one, which I've moved to 2 meters from the corner and 1 meter off the ground. And then having added that cube to the engine, it actually got added up here at the end of this function. I'm also adding to the cube a click handler, on-click handler, that changes the size, the scale of the cube that you clicked on, and spawns a new cube. So that's how this program works. We'll be looking at some other scenes, including your own. You go to, let's go back to the lesson. Where is that? Here it is. Let's continue on kind of where we were. This is for making a new a structure for your scenes and creating an empty scene directory. Here's the DCL init and DCL start on that default scene. Here's where you go get Visual Studio Code Editor so that you can edit your game TS file. Here's a command line way of opening that up on game TS. We saw that a little bit. You read through the code. I suggest you make some sort of a change to the code, as I did, the position of the initial coordinates. You can also change the rotation rate of the cube. Let me show you that. That would be, let's say I want it to rotate 10 times as fast. I would put the scalar for the rotation here, and it will, if I go back and reload the scene, which is here, I'm just going to hit a Control F5 that reloads the browser. Usually that's all you need to do if you make some minor change to your scene. There's currently a bug in the SDK that sometimes when you add a new object or a new texture or something to a scene, that it doesn't see it by simply hitting a Control F5. It's a known bug, in which case you go back and Control C on the little server in your command line and do a DCL start again, and then the stuff will show up. You can pull your hair out trying to figure out why something you added to the scene doesn't show up if you don't know that that's a bug. So it's rotating a lot faster now. Yep. So going back to the lesson, it's right here. So we just did this part here. Code has a really good undo. It goes all the way back to at least the last time you closed. It goes past when you do a save. If you do a save and then you come back, which I did, you come back here and hit a Control Z, it will undo all the things that I've done here. And Control Y puts them back one at a time. It's a really nice undo. So if you break a scene, I'll just keep code open and just go back and undo and try again. Okay. So that would be the minimum assignment for this time, is to create a new empty directory, use DCL init to create a scene, take a look at it, and do a screenshot of the scene so that we can see that you got in there. There's some bonus work. Oh yeah, actually, and create some sort of yeah, try making one small change right there. That's part of the assignment, not only to snapshot the default scene, but to snapshot a scene that you've made a little change to. Some people will be clever and make the box orange or something. But I have some bonus work for you here, which is, and I recommend you try it if you get this far. And that is, if you download your builder scene, you'll get a zip file that contains an SDK scene. So the directory structure of what you have in an SDK scene. And so you can unzip the content of it into your working directory that you've already done a DCL in. So you create a directory, it's empty, do DCL init in it, then take the downloaded zip file and take all the contents from it and drop it into your working directory. It'll replace some of the files, obviously, like the game.ts will be different. It'll also add some models to your directory structure. And then use DCL start, and it will open up your builder scene in the SDK. And you can make changes there. You can move stuff around. You can play with it. And then take a snapshot of that. And then for delivering the bonus points, I'd like you to deliver both a snapshot and a zip file that you've zipped back up of your changed file. So you go into the directory, you do a zip of all the contents in there, except omit these three things. Normally, when you create a zip or bundle up a scene file, you want to omit the gigantic directories of stuff that is standard in every scene. You don't need it, and it makes your zip file huge. It also kind of freezes the version of the SDK that scene's in, as opposed to getting the advantage of later updates. So you omit the node modules directory, you omit the bin directory, and there's one file in the main directory that you omit, which is the package.json. There's another file called package.json. You do want to include that. So everything in this directory, let me just show you what a directory looks like again. I'll show you this trick. I'm in the little server directory, right? I hit Control-C here, say yes. And if I do explorer dot, this is Windows. I have to spell it right. It'll open Explorer on that directory. That's kind of a quick shortcut. And so if I was going to zip this stuff up, I would say, select everything in here, but undo the bin, the node modules, and the package lock. I right-click. I have a zipper installed. Add to archive. I'm a Windows guy, so I usually like zip instead of RAR, but either one is fine. And now I have a zip file. If I open that, I'll see that I have most of the content of my directory. So that's how you make this. And so what you would deliver as an assignment is a snapshot of your scene, or if you've done this the bonus part, you would also upload the test zip. So I could take a look at it if I want to, or other people can. Alrighty. That is the walkthrough of the assignment. I imagine might be some questions.
Hey, Carl, this cube that appears, is that cube something that is in the engine, or is it
Yes.
Does this code create the cube?
No. So there are two types of things that can be in the world that you see. There are some things that are called primitives. They're built into the SDK. There's a cube, a sphere, a cone, a cylinder, a plane. I think there's now something called a NFT frame. I haven't played with it yet.
Is there a listing of those?
Yeah, they're absolutely in the SDK documentation.
Okay.
They're called shapes. Go look around and find the shapes documentation. In fact, let's just go there. But let me finish. The other kind of thing that you can put in the world is an external model in the GLTF format. All of the models that you get in Builder, and that if you export the scene, you'll actually get the GLTF files for those trees and lounge chairs and stuff. They'll be in your scene. You can go look at them. They'll be in the models directory. It'll create a model subdirectory in your scene, which the default scene doesn't do because it's not using any external models. It's using the primitive cube that's just known by the SDK itself. So let's go look at that documentation. Docs, decentraland.org. So it's in the development guide section. All the stuff will turn out to be quite interesting to you eventually, but entities and components. Here's kind of a structure of how the SDK digests things from your scene. There's a runtime thing called an engine, which is what's just running all the time. It's kind of part of what I started up with DCL Start. But in the SDK, that also launches a local web server. The engine is what, for example, knows how to pass a click event out to an entity, or how to, once every 30th of a second, call back to a rotator system or something like that. And you add things to the engine so that they appear or that they work. So a system has to be added so that it gets called. The update method gets called. An entity has to be added so it appears in the world. Entities by themselves are pretty simple, but they need a shape to be added to them to be seen. So the entity by itself is just a point in space. Doesn't have any visual representation, but you add a shape to it. You can add a primitive shape like a box, or you can add a model shape from a GLTF file. And you use that, this method here is called add component. So you add components to the entity, and what that does is it gives it shapes, it gives it materials, it gives it position and scale and rotation, things like that. And then down here, it's talking about how you add things in, et cetera, but then it talks about the entities that exist. I believe are down on this page. Well, I seem to be wrong. Let me go up to the instructions here. It must be the next thing. Component groups, files, shape components. There they are. The primitive shapes are box, sphere, plane, cylinder, cone. I'm not sure. There's something new for putting up a image of an NFT, like your CryptoKitties, and it's not listed here, and I haven't played with it. I don't know what it's called. I see that I have 2 comments I haven't answered here. A few, actually. Take a break here for a moment and look at these. Question about editing scenes in the SDK. Can you do it graphically rather than using code? The simple answer is no. The simple answer is if you want to move stuff around graphically, use the builder. The SDK is, as delivered from Decentraland, is entirely oriented to editing the TypeScript files and reloading the scene. The builder will get more capabilities later, but right now you can't load a GLTF external model into your scene. Only primitives and only the curated models that are in their palette, their library. So if you want to do something more than that, you want to use your own models, you want to add behavior like rotation, stuff like that, then you have to use the SDK and you have to use the code editor. Now, the footnote to that is that in a later lesson, I will show you how to use a tool that I built that you can add to your SDK scene, and now you have an in-world tool for moving things around and adding new things. It's a kind of a temporary thing until the builder gets richer. And it's called Builder HUD, and you'll see references to it down later in the lessons. Thank you to Sachs for saying how you open up the Finder, I assume, in when you're at the command line, which is just open space dot instead of Explorer space dot. Ember, this doesn't show the syntax for giving a specific shape of a GLTF that you own. Is there a good example for those trying to do that? Yes, the example would be go to the builder, build a scene with one object in it, download that scene, open it up in the SDK, and you will see how you import a foreign model, because that's what that scene does. The builder creates game.ts that imports a GLTF shape for each object, and it's getting it from a models subdirectory. So the syntax is there, and we do talk about it in a later lesson as well. So anyway, here are the primitive shapes, and down here later, right there, you've created an entity, and then you add a component to it of a GLTF shape, and here's the path and file name. So it's in the model subdirectory, house.gltf. You'll find lines like this in a builder file. If you export it, you'll get a zip file. You open it up, look at the games.ts, or just expanded into an empty working directory, or a directory that you've already done DCL init in, and then just drop the contents from the zip in there, and you'll have a working directory that is a working scene, that is your builder scene, and you can explore the code. Should I demonstrate that? Would that be, maybe I should do that. So let's open up Builder. By the way, this is also how you can get items from their library into custom scenes that you make. So I'm going to create a new scene. Oops, excuse me, that was not a new scene. I was clicking on a scene named New Scene. I'm going to make a one parcel scene. Is my screen visible? Can somebody confirm that?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so here's the one parcel scene. It automatically gets a grass on the ground, and I'm going to the Genesis City nature things, and I'm going to pick my favorite tree and drop it in the scene. I'm also going to get a separate thing, maybe a rock, and drop it here. So I have two GLTF models that I've gotten from their palette and put it into my scene. And now I'm going to download that scene to a zip file. And if I open that zip file, familiar looking directory structure, right? It's like what you've seen in the DCL init directory, except now in this one, I have a models directory. And in here, I have three folders, one for the grass, one for the rock, one for the tree, and in, say, the tree, I have a GLB file. GLB is a compressed into one file version of the GLTF. GLTF by itself, you'd have a GLTF file, a bin file, and potentially a bunch of image files for the textures. But a GLB file is a form of that that's all compressed into one file, and it's really the best one to use for deployment. If you're doing development, you might want to use the raw GLTF so you can see the pieces, but we'll get into that later in the lessons. If I double click on, no, let me not do it here. Let me go up a directory, two directories. I'm going to select all this stuff, except I don't want their bin directory. I guess it wouldn't hurt because it gets rebuilt every time. So the instructions say take all this content. I'm going to go over to my working directory area, but I'm going to go up one directory and make a new directory called download example, right? C F3 types out the rest of that line on Windows. So I've changed directory into download example, and it's empty, right? But I do DCL init in here so that I have all the right infrastructure for the SDK in this directory. And then I'm going to use the Explorer here to open up the Explorer on this directory. There it is. That's the brand new boilerplate scene. Go to my zip file, take all this stuff and drag it into that folder. And it's going to replace some of the files in there. And I want to do that. You see that it wrote all those things in there, including a models directory. If I go in here, go to the tree, double click on this GLB, there's a program built into Windows that can display a GLB or a GLTF file. This doesn't look quite like a tree, does it? Anybody know what the reason is? Use voice if you do.
Sorry, I thought someone else would answer. That would be the collider that's showing to stop advertising.
Yeah,
that's right.
I just wanted to say I was waiting.
Yes, very good. In Decentraland, if you just have a tree shape, you walk up to it and you just walk right through it. By default, models, including the primitives, are phantom. You just can walk right through them. If you want to make them so you can't walk through them, you have to do something explicit to make them solid, like you can't walk through it. And with a GLTF file, you do that by putting a certain additional object or shape in the mesh into the GLTF. You can do that in Blender. We'll talk about that later in the course. But by having a collider in there, then you can't walk through the tree. It's usually a very simple shape that sort of encloses the other shape. But it's opaque typically unless you make it transparent, which you can do. It doesn't, and the engine, the DCL engine ignores the collider visually. Doesn't display it. So this is not going to look like this in the scene. It's going to look like a tree, but you won't be able to walk through it. I'm going to go, and by the way, this texture is actually important. I'm not quite sure how they're doing it, but it seems like this GLB still have one external file. It's kind of strange, unusual. So if I go back to this scene, now the quick way to get to the command for this window, if you don't already have it open, which I do, is just copy this, and in your command window, if you type CD space and Control V, it would change you to the directory that you were looking at in Explorer. That's another shortcut. I'm going to go ahead and start the scene up. This change in it with that content from the builder scene is now in the SDK scene. Hopefully we're going to see a green ground and a tree and a rock. And a one parcel gray grid on the ground. Well, aren't we lucky it actually worked? There's the rock. You notice this is not the builder's preview, this is the SDK preview. By the way, it should look exactly, I think pretty much exactly like except that the way the SDK starts up the preview, it actually throws an extra parameter up here. Do you see the scene debug panel? This parameter right here. What that does is it gives you this, your frame rate information over here. It's running nice and fast. It also gives you a indication that if you hit the P key, you'll get a bunch of information about your scene. Are you saying poly count here? They mean triangle count, because all the polys in the scene in Decentraland are triangles. There's no textures being brought in. It's interesting. So that texture file that we saw in the folder, I'm not sure what it is because I think it's not needed by the GLB, or if it is, they're not counting ones that are brought in from GLB files. There's 3 materials, probably one for the ground, one for the rock, one for the tree. 4 entities. Quite sure what the 4th entity is. We're going to look at the code in a moment. There's 3 meshes. The ground, I think, has a mesh. 3 bodies. 30 components, because we've added various components to these objects to get their shape and their materials and all that. So that's kind of the stats on the scene. Let's look at the source code for it. I'm stopping the server so I can use the command line to get to the code. Oh, I did have to remember to type \. Okay, so I'm looking at the code for this scene. It looks a little different than the one we saw. This is like the default scene. The new scene is quite different, right? It just kind of an enumeration of all the things that are being added to the scene. Just kind of a stream of consciousness of the stuff that the builder added. So let's just walk through it. So the first thing is that there's a scene entity. It's sometimes useful to have an entity that represents the scene as a whole. The reason is if you make all of the other entities to be parented by the scene, like the next entity as a set parent to the scene entity, it means that if you move the scene entity, everything under it moves. It's a good way to move a bunch of stuff at one time. So they've made a scene entity. Let's just walk through it. There's a new entity call to a variable called scene. Now they're setting up a transform. A transform contains position, rotation, and scale information. Scale is size. And again, it's XYZ for the position. Scale in X, Y, and Z. It says scale it 1 times to whatever the model normal scale is, but you could make it twice as big by going 2, 2, 2. Rotation, they're using the technically correct quaternion method, which takes 4 variables. And I'm sorry, I will never be able to explain to you how quaternions work. But there's ways of setting up rotation using rotation in X, Y, and Z. And we can talk about that later, a later course, a later lesson. And then they have the floor, the tree, and the rock. So let's look what they do with, let's say, the tree. So they created an entity called tree pine01. That entity has no appearance in the world. It's just a point in space. It has been set so that its parent is the scene. So they take the variable and say dot set parent on it, which is a method that's on entity, and then setting the scene object from up above and as its parent. Then they're loading a GLTF shape that they're going to use with that entity from the models directory, the tree pine01 subdirectory, the tree pine01 GLB. It's all in quotes. You can use single or double quotes here, but they have to be the same, whichever you use. So they're saying a new GLTF shape that loads this, and it puts it into a variable called GLTF shape 2. And then you're adding that shape to the pine tree. You could use just add component, but they're using add component to replace because it's just a little more safe in case there was already a shape entity. It just replaces the existing one. There happens not to be one, so you could just use add component, which is what you more often see in code that you write or that you see other people's. And then they're creating a transform component, which is a new variable. It's a new transform. And then in the parameters of the new transform, they have defining all 3 of the transform elements: position, rotation, scale. You don't need to define all of them. you can leave some of them at their defaults. Default would be position 0, 0, 0, which means right at the southwest corner of the scene. Rotation would be unrotated by default. Scale would be ×1 by default. So this is pretty close to a default position, rotation, scale, except that they've moved the tree to where we put it in the scene, which is more closer to the middle. Then they are adding the transform component to the tree. So now it assumes that size, rotation, and position. And then importantly, they're adding the entity of the tree to the engine so that it'll render. If you don't do that, it'll never show up. If later you want to remove it, have it disappear, you remove it from the engine. Same for the rock. So let's go look at our scene for a second. What if I want to make a second tree? I could go back to the builder and do it, but you should know that once you make any changes to the STK scene, you can't take it back. There's no way to upload the STK scene into the builder. It's because the builder doesn't know how to deal with all the things you might do in code. It would break it. So it's kind of a one-way trip. You can always go back to the builder to find some more things you like to put in your model and then download that and then simply take those models in that script and put them in your STK scene to add that stuff. But I guess the most efficient way to work would be to think, what are the things from their library do I want in the scene, and where do I want them, and how big do I want the scene to be, and build it in the builder that far. Export it and do the next stage of work of behavior, custom objects, moving things around further. Do that in the SDK. You just can't go backwards in that pipeline. So I'm going to make a copy of the tree. I'm doing this now in the editor, and I'm going to put it in a little different place. So this code right here, I'm going to copy. Control C, paste, Control V. And now it's complaining because I've defined the same variable twice. It doesn't like that. It says you can't define a variable and then go redefine it. So I'm just going to rename this tree O2. I'm going to double click here to get Control C. I selected the whole word, and I'm going to actually find the other place where this is used here, right there, and change that one so that the second tree gets added. Still not happy because I'm redefining the shape variable. So I'm going to make that one. Did I break his geometry? Let's say 2B here. All right. And I select that and put that here also. And by the way, I could also just use the same shape component I had here. It's the same shape. I could just be using it down here, but I'm doing it a different way. I'm making two versions of that shape. And then transform 3, I'll just call it transform 3B. But I have to also put that here. So now I think that I've replaced everything here that was a conflict with the previous pine tree. If I view the scene right now, what will I see? Somebody use voice and answer.
One tree on top of another tree.
Yes, right?
Yeah,
So
two trees in the same place.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So let's try that here. Oops, I've killed my scene. I have to restart it. Okay. I was closing the window from the previous scene that wasn't running anymore and letting this one load. And, well, where's the other tree? Let's go back to the code and move it a little bit. So the second tree is here, is position. Let's move it a couple meters west by decreasing this to 4.5 and a couple meters south by decreasing this to 6. I've changed the position vector to a new location and coming back to the scene, Control F5. I'm grinning because I made a mistake, and it's a subtle one. I have somehow, I moved them both, right? I think. Or I didn't put the right model into the...
I think you didn't add it to the engine. You changed the name, but you didn't add it to the engine?
I think that that's here. I think that and that is the second, it's Chupine 2.
Okay.
Transform 3B, new transform.
You have...
Add, oh, there's the error right there. I didn't change which tree I added the transform to. So I added the second transform to the first tree, replacing it. If I do that, now I'm adding the transform, the different location to only the one tree. And now I think we'll see 2 trees.
And the one above, you would need to do as well, I think. That for the add component or replace, it's also Chupine 1.
That's why.
And the set parent, but okay, that's not important. Not for viewing.
Yeah, it's not real important, but I should get it right. I'll make this scene available. Did it set parent? Where is it? Here. Yeah, I did a bad job of showing you how to find all the things that were missing, needed to be changed. What I should have done is I should have changed, I should have commented this part out, the first part, which you can do by doing a /dot, a /*, and an */, and then beginning to work on things that are, quote, missing. All of the stuff would have shown up red that was wrong. So, I mean, I would still have to start changing things, but it would some of that stuff would, no, I'm wrong. I'm gonna stop telling you how to the complex advanced way to fix it. There's yet a different thing you could do with some search and replace. Actually, I'll just show for those who know coding. What you would do is you would comment out the other one and you start doing things like right click on this and say rename symbol. And work through them to fix them. You want to comment this out when you're doing rename symbol because the rename symbol won't affect things that are in comments. That would have been a better solution. But anyway, I think we have it now. And so, does anybody know why we're going to end up spawning outside the scene? We're not going to spawn at the southwest corner of the scene. Do you know why? This parameter in the scene says, where in the world are you going to spawn? And we define this to be at 0, 0. I had backed away, which when you move around, it changes the parameter. So if I back away further, you'll see this will, URL will change even further to a -2, -3, etc. And I simply reloaded it with that same URL. So I was actually where I had gotten my camera to the other time. I will zip this scene up and stick it in the, actually I'll put both zip files. The original that I downloaded from the builder which you can upload into the builder. And then I'll also put this, this zip file of this scene up so that people can grab them and look at them if they want. Somewhere here we have a Zoom window with comments, right? Where's our comments? Somewhere I hid the little, let me go back up here and open it. I think chat, there it is. See if I have any written comments here that I want to see. Yes, you can, in the builder, you cannot change the scale of objects. They did not implement that, I think, because they didn't want people making silly versions of their library. It was sort of an aesthetic decision. In the SDK, you absolutely can change the scale. Let's make one of the trees bigger. Let's make the second one bigger. So I'm going to make it 1.5 times as tall. I'm making it 1.5 times as big in all 3 dimensions. Otherwise, it's going to be tall and skinny. Back here, Control F5, reload the scene. Indeed. If I wanted to make it tall but skinny, right, I would only increase the X, the Y dimension, which is the up dimension. Like that. Actually, just for grins, let's make it 3 times as tall. So now I have a question. I'm not respawning where my camera was. Let me respawn over here instead. Again, that's because I reloaded it with this -1 parameter for the parcel Y coordinate, and it always loads you at the southwest corner of the parcel. So even though I was standing up over here when I reloaded, it put me at the southwest corner of that parcel. The trunk of the tree is the same size at the bottom, but 3 times as tall. If I go into the scene, now my parameter at the top in the URLs will switch from -1 to 0. And now if I reload, I'll be at the southwest corner of the 1 parcel scene. So these parameters up here are important. The %2C in here is a representation of a comma. When you're giving people parameters to places in the world, you can also replace the %2C with just a comma and get the same effect, although it gets converted back. So with 0, 0, I should be spawning at the southwest corner of the scene, and I am. I'm going to reserve the description of how you rotate things to another lesson. I think I could do it now. Rotation is a little awkward because the underlying rotation scheme in Decentraland is a 4-parameter thing called a quaternion. And conceptually, it's really hard to understand. I have worked with them, but I do not understand them. But the good news is that there's a 3-coordinate representation rotation that you can use to do that. And the way you would do that is, I'm going to comment this line out, which is 2 slashes, and make a new version of it here for comparison. And instead of Does anybody remember the it's in the documentation. Let's go to the documentation. I never remember this off the top of my head. But once you have it somewhere in your code, you can copy it and go more quickly. Development guide. Is there a search here? So you still say new transform rotation right there. So still it's a quaternion, but you're setting it up using 3 rotation variables. And if I just put 0, 0, 0, it means unrotated. But if I put a rotation on the y-axis, by the way, y is up and down axis. So I want to rotate it around the trunk of the tree. I'd rotate it on the y-axis. If I rotate on the other axis, I'm going to tip the tree over or to one side or the other. So I'm going to try this one first. And this is in degrees. So let's just do a 10-degree rotation on that. I need a comma there. Do you see the there's a syntax error here, this red underline? That means that there's something here or earlier that's broken. And what it is, when I made this line here to replace the original, I forgot to put a comma after it. And that cleared up the problem. Oh, I also want to show you one other thing. If there's an error in your code, I don't know if you can see it way over on the right, there's a red dot here in the margin. Kind of hard to see. When you see a flood of red over here, it's because you have a bunch of errors. But also one other thing, if you're like somewhere else and you say, do I have any errors in here? F8 will, the F8 key will move you to the next error and mark it. It tells you what's wrong with it. At this point, it's expecting a comma before I see scale. So I need to put a comma here at the end of this. So Control S to save it. Come back here to, let's set them the same size. It'd be easier to see the rotation. Control S, Control F5. What is a quaternion? A quaternion is a representation of rotation in space using a 4-parameter system that I do not understand. And if you want to study it more, somebody nicely put a link to what a quaternion is.
Yeah, maybe you can add a word because I also had a look at it, and of course the math, you're totally right. I think you need to be a bit of a insider to get that. But the example is pretty well in the in this video.
Thank you.
And
thank you very much.
In a nutshell, you take your arm pointed away from your right arm, and then you look at it. Then you have a vector, right? So it's in 3-dimensional space. Your arm is a vector, and then if you turn your hand, if you turn it, if you tilt it, that's a quaternion. That's the 4th movement. And then there's math behind it, but that's it, basically. So
sounds a little like Stargate.
Yeah, the idea comes from, of course, the gaming. And imagine you have two, let's say, two vehicles that crash into each other. They both have a momentum, and they also rotate in space, for instance. And then with the math behind, you can then, calculate how the things are pushing away from each other, etc.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the link. I'll put it in the comments in the doc or somewhere. In fact, before I lose track of that link, let's take that, and somewhere in all my windows, there's a documentation for the class. There it is. Nope. Try it again. I'll just stick it here for now. Thank you, Mike.
Welcome.
Let's get to a position where we can see that one tree is rotated. It's a little bit relative to the other one. I think if we sit between the two of them about there, you can see that the second tree, which is the tree on the left, is rotated a little bit clockwise if you're looking from the top. You see that? The way to understand which direction something will rotate when you're using a Euler is to use your left hand. It's called the left hand rule that Decentraland's 3D world uses for a lot of things. First of all, just put your hand out in front of you and make a fist. Stick your thumb up. Stick your first finger forward away from you and your second finger halfway, like 90 degrees, so it's to the right. That is the coordinate system in Decentraland. Nope, I have that wrong. Excuse me. Rotate your whole hand around so your thumb's to the right. That's it. So your thumb's to the right, your first finger is up, and your second finger is facing forward away from you. Your thumb is X, your first finger is Y, and your second finger is Z with regard to position vectors in moving things around. So Y is up. And when you rotate, you're rotating using a left-hand rule. And so the way to think of that is stick your thumb straight up and curl your fingers around like you're maybe holding a rod or something. And if you rotate the thing in the direction that your fingers are pointing, that's a positive rotation. So the fact that I rotated a positive 10 degrees in this world meant that that left-hand tree rotated, so the front of the tree is turning to the left a little bit from us, right? So the left-hand rule is useful for both X, Y, Z coordinates for position. It's also, and that's the scale dimensions are the same ones. If you scale it in Y, it gets taller. And then rotation works with left-hand rule with your thumb pointing in the correct direction for that axis. So Y is up, so you point your thumb up. And the curled fingers of your left hand show what a positive rotation would do. A negative rotation goes the other direction, and it's in degrees. If you wanted to rotate something, say in the x-axis, you would point your thumb the direction that's positive in x, which is east, and your fingers would curl around in such a way that you would roll the object. A positive rotation would roll the object kind of away from you. And again, Mike Quest found a nice link here on that. Oh, there's a couple of them.
First one is just, yeah, exactly what you explained.
Exactly the same. And the second one, does it have a rotation example? Oh, no, how it kind of, the mathematics of it?
Yeah, it's a bit of background behind it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, if you happen to find a rotation hand representation for left-hand rule, that would be cool. We'll put that there too. Okay, so they're there. And before we break, we're going to have some more time for questions and stuff, but I just want to remind people that the next 2 weeks, the meeting will be 2 hours later. I think after that, we'll probably go back usually to the same time as today. But on the 10th and 17th, we'll start, instead of 4 p.m. UTC. Is that right? Yeah, 4 to 6. We'll start 6 to 8. And I think I may have put that wrong in my notes. But anyway, that's just 2 hours later than this time. Any questions? I just want to say, I want to sympathize with people who are seeing some stuff that's hard for the first time, dealing with code, dealing with some of the three-dimensional thinking here. But just be patient with yourself. I use the analogy that learning a programming language, learning something like this, is a lot like learning a natural language, which is you just keep being exposed to it, trying to understand it, and gradually you become familiar with it, and you can even begin to express yourself in it. And the easiest way to start to work with code is to get examples that are good, real examples, working examples of code, which you can do from the builder output, or you can do it from the Decentraland sample scenes. If you go to the docs, you'll find a page that lists a bunch of sample scenes. You can go get those and look at their source code. You can put them in a scene and build it. So the best way to learn to begin to express yourself is to take good code and modify it. Just make a change, kind of like we're doing in the exercise. Make the thing bigger, or move it around a little bit, or rotate it, or other things like that.
Yeah, maybe a thing to add, if you work with code and have the Explorer window open, you can also start, if you always want to stop and start your DCL process, so the server process, you can start it with DCL space -B. So it won't start every time a new browser, which can be a bit annoying. So then you just keep your browser open and just do a refresh.
Is that a capital B or lowercase b, or does it matter?
Lowercase, but I think the other would work as well. But lowercase is, if you do a DCL start help or help start, then it explains the different options. And you can send it to another port if you want.
Mm-hmm. You can run more than one scene at the same time by doing it on different ports.
Yes, you can.
And putting the browser at the different ports.
Yes.
If you have a good enough computer.
Yes.
Uh-huh. It's also how you can, if you, for an advanced topic here, you can install the SDK on a little Linux server, like a droplet at DigitalOcean, and start a preview there and get the URL from it and pass it out to somebody to see and play with your scene. It's one way to do that. There's actually an easier way using Zeit now, which we will cover later.
Hey, Carl?
Yeah.
So this code that appears, this is all TypeScript, right?
Yes.
Okay, so someone studies TypeScript, they would get an idea of how.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, TypeScript is a very nice programming language. It's a very reasonable language to learn as a first language because it is somewhat object-oriented and type safe. If you assign the wrong thing to the wrong type of variable, it'll complain and let you know in the Visual Studio Code editor, actually. So yeah, it's a nice programming language. It is conceptually, it's an extension of JavaScript, which is one of the most widely used languages. It runs in pretty much any browser, JavaScript does. TypeScript is, like I said, an extension which you have to do a build step on, which happens during DCL start, that turns it into JavaScript, so it actually runs in your browser. There's good documentation around on TypeScript and how to write it properly, but it's also perfectly reasonable to use examples from the sample file. So I'll show you where those are. Today we showed you how to get the code from your builder scene, but if you go to docs.decentraland.org, scene examples. and it tells you how to go get one. And here's a bunch of them here. And if you click on, say, the code, if you explore the scene, you're actually going to go in and look, be in the scene and look at it. But if you say code, you're going to the GitHub repository where the code exists. And if you have Git installed, you just do a git clone. But you can also download a zip file of all that code. Take that zip file, expand it into a working directory that you've already done DCL init in, and you're off and running. You look at it. But you can also just peek at it here. I mean, here's the source directory, right? And here's the game.ts. And now we're looking at the code for for that particular scene. If you just wanted to go peek at it and get an idea, you don't actually install it and run it. You can just look at it. Any questions about that? We're going to be using GitLab later in this course. It's very similar to GitHub. It's just the competitor. One that I'm a little more familiar with and like a little bit better. I've used both. I think, quite honestly, GitLab is just a more complete solution, and it's free. GitHub is free if you make your project public. But if you want to have some private repositories, you have to pay. GitLab is based on your team size. So for individual developers or small teams working in Decentraland, GitLab will be a free solution for you. Just very briefly, what these things like GitHub or GitLab do is allows you to store your scene content and code in the cloud in a safe way that a team can collaborate on. It will keep track of versions. So if you make some changes and you want to go back and look at what it used to look like because something's gone wrong, you can do that. It also has an issue repository. They both do. And you can add issues to a project, like a bug report or an enhancement idea or just a task of something you need to do. So that's a real nice infrastructure for working on a code project, especially good if you want to preserve your code previous versions in case you need to go back to them, or in case you want to collaborate with other people and have you both working on stuff. So we will talk more about that in a later lesson. So is anybody out there feeling daunted about working with code? And if so, do you want to share your daunt and maybe we can talk about it a little bit? How to get past getting started? Is that a noun, daunt?
It's a very quiet audience.
I know. I am sure that people out there who have never worked with code who have some uncertainty about whether they're going to be able to do this. I'm certain of it. And let me say, you may not choose in the long run to become a great programmer, but you ought to understand a little bit of how this works. And other teammates and instructor will, speaking myself in the third person, I will help you get past things in your early learning curve. And there's other participants in the course who are much more advanced programmers. So don't hesitate to ask questions along the way. You put up a zip file of a scene that has a problem and ask for help. If you have trouble downloading and installing the SDK, ask for help.
Yeah. Maybe
Ember had a question. Go ahead, hold that comment, Mike. Ember had a question about, it's saying a comma is missing. So let's go back and look at the error code that was produced there. I'm just going to go back here and take this comma out. And if your screen brightness is right, you'll see there's a little red code, a little red dot over here on the right side. But also, conspicuously, there's an underline here as though it's misspelled in Word or something. And if you're somewhere else and you hit an F8, it will take you to the next error in your code. So it's saying at this cursor position, it's not saying necessarily the word scale, but at this cursor position, the code digester is expecting a comma because the previous line ends with a closed parentheses, but it's a list of things that are comma separated. And so there should be a comma there before a word like scale appears. So the issue is that I could put a comma right here and the code would be correct. It just wouldn't look right, right? It's saying right now it's expecting a comma right here. So I put one there and the code goes away, and this code would run just fine because white space like this blank stuff does not matter to the compiler. In fact, if I delete all that and have it just like that, that is also syntactically correct. Space there, that's fine. If I take this comma out, once again, it says expecting a comma here. That means here or before. Typically, the problem is not necessarily like right where the red is, but there or before. If I put a misspelling here, it says, well, wait a minute, a transform does not have a parameter called scale. And if I, it's missing, yeah, sometimes the what it says is wrong is kind of vague because it doesn't know exactly what you meant to do. It didn't know for sure that what you wanted to put was scale. All it knows is that it doesn't know this thing. But it tells you basically, as you look at it and say, oh, well, that's misspelled. That's how that works. Ember, does that answer your question? Okay. Ember, you made a comment that the walkthrough is, their walkthrough is a bit of a mess for adding objects. Are you talking about in the docs? Yeah. That's true. I worry a little bit about my syllabus, my course material. Sometimes I just feel like it's incredibly verbose. Hopefully every detail in there is useful to somebody. And I err, if anything, I err on the side of trying to explain all the little things you might need to know or that make the work go easier or faster. But pardon me if it just seems sometimes really long and complex. Their documentation is generally correct, but sometimes it assumes things about your knowledge.
Hi, Carl. Sorry, just to let you know, I mean, I have some programming experience, but I think your documentation, I've started reading it, I've read lessons 1 and 2, is actually really good. And the more detail, the better, because even when you have some experience, you tend to miss 1 or 2 basic things. And when you get there, you get stuck because you just don't know what it is. So it's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Feel free to put comments in the document. It's not sacred. This is a draft, and it's a collaborative course. So feel free to put comments that clarify something or ask a question. If you ask a question, you might want to also put it in the course chat because I might not notice that a comment was added unless I am pointed at it. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you saw what I just saw there, which was, okay, so I messed up the syntax here, right? and I hit F8 to find that, and I corrected it here. Oops, with a comma. And it looks like I might still have an error, right? The two look very similar, except that it kind of grayed out and the red underline went away. So if you're not sure if you got it correct, just close it and go up above it, click up here somewhere, hit F8 again, and you'll probably find that there is no error. It doesn't open anything up. Oh, one other subtle thing about Visual Studio Code, if you are working on a scene like this, and then you decide, I want to reinstall the local piece of the SDK, and there's instructions on how to do that. But for a while, you have deleted some like node modules and that in particular. You're going to get lots of syntax errors showing up here because you've deleted the library that this thing is calling. Like a GLTF shape won't be known anymore. And the way you solve that is to reinstall the Decentraland ECS package, the part of the SDK that you need in each scene, and then just close and reopen this thing. I'm going to demonstrate that, what I've just said. So I'm going to go to the scene here, hit Control-C. I'm having to hit it a couple times. And by the way, instead of hitting yes, you can just hit Control-C one more time. I do that all the time. And I'm going to, in the scene, I'm going to use the npm command to uninstall, let's remove, R-E-M-O-V-E, or just RM, the Decentraland, not the whole SDK, but the piece of it that lives in the directory. This command, if I've typed it correctly, and I have not, Decentraland -ECS, that will actually remove, use Node.js's npm command to remove the local directory's SDK portion. If I do directory here now, did I type it wrong? npm rm Decentraland ECS. The node modules directory is still there, but it's empty. Okay, so now you go back here and you'll see, oh, everything looks broken, right? Because the dependencies for this code are gone. This would also happen, by the way, if you put a game.ts file into an empty directory, but you haven't done the DCL init yet. If you get your zip file from Builder and drop it in a directory and then open up games, it could look like this if you haven't done the right thing in that directory, which is either do DCL init before you put anything else in there, or you can come in here to the directory and do npm I Decentraland ECS. I is install. And notice I'm not using a -G in either of these commands because I'm not trying to do this globally. I'm not installing this thing globally. I'm installing it specifically in this directory. So the SDK as a whole is called Decentraland, and it's installed globally with -G in the npm command. Whereas the Decentraland ECS, it's a piece of the SDK. It gets installed when you do a DCL init, but you can reinstall it or update it using this command. It tells you what version you have. It's not 6.0, it's 6.2.3 now. A lot of things have changed. They've made materials much better and they solved a lot of bugs. It's much more stable. If you're using it in world and you're walking around, you get the snap crash much, much less often, for example. Now, if I look back here, oops, it didn't fix it. So this is what I'm talking about. Just close this and go back to where you have it. Hopefully you put it on your taskbar or you just run it from code here. But I have it on my taskbar. Just click on it. It remembers all the files you had opened. And now the syntax errors are gone because when it opened it, it found all those dependencies. So it doesn't automatically find them just because you put them in place. You actually have to close code and open it back up again. I think we're getting close to time. Any last questions? And remember, we're meeting 2 hours later next week and the week after. I wanted to mention one other thing. We're going to be giving out a certificate of completion for those who finished all the assignments. It'll be a really nice diploma for our certificate from the university. We're working on the design of it right now. You're going to be proud to have it. I'm also considering the possibility that we'll make a non-fungible token for it so that we can give you an electronic copy of it, Ethereum copy of it. So I'm going to be asking folks to provide me more contact information in direct messaging. For example, those of you who have registered for the Zoom meeting, and they're here, I do have a name and an email address from you, but I don't know how it necessarily correlates to your Discord ID. And the Discord ID is how I'm keeping track of completion of assignments. So at some point, if you would be willing, send me the name you want to have on your certificate, the email address that you are using for the Zoom registration so I can correlate it all, and an Ethereum address that you are willing to have us push a token into for the token representation of the certificate if we decide to do that. Don't give me the secret address, just the public one. And if you don't know how to do that yet, there's plenty of time. We're going to be at this for probably another at least 8 weeks. So I'll put a notice about that eventually there's a little more clarity about it. I'll put it in the class, in the chat. Any other questions? Somebody want to sing us a song?
What do you want to hear?
The official anthem of the university, of course.
Oh, okay. What's the
lyrics?
lyrics?
I guess we need one.
There's one.
Maybe we need one. I really like the university's logo.
I'm singing with my kid, but it's all in German, so it won't help you guys.
Okay. All right. Well,
I wanted to say one comment. So I'm programming. I'm used to programming, and I must say one of the things in this particular setup with Decentraland and this virtuality that is very fascinating. I mean, if you program and you're into it, the things are forming in your head. Your world is forming in your head, and this time you can really see it. I mean, it's kind of like becoming really visual, or not if you have a mistake, of course. But that is even more fascinating, I must say. This was something it reignited the old passion for programming.
Excellent. Yeah, that 3D visualization of what you've written. Interactive, you can walk around in it.
And click on it. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I agree. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. The ideas I have of things I want to make is expanding much faster than the time I have to work on it. So I'm keeping a list of the things I want to make. I've written some music, composed some music in the past, and one of the pieces is just I imagine a group of performers trying to play this piece. It was done in Sonar and a digital audio workstation. It would be incredibly lively if musicians were playing this. They'd be like wearing themselves out. And I'm thinking of making an animation of it in some scene in Decentraland. I think it would be a gas, as an example, because we combine sound and animation and the whole thing.
Yeah, we did some Eili and I, we tried in our little hackathon. We put some audio sources and let them rotate around you. And that is scary.
Oh, yeah.
So, because you have the, what is this effect? If sound comes at you.
Yes. Doppler?
Yes, thank you. The Doppler effect. And you have the thing rushing by, and it is really scary, especially if you take some tunes, just tunes, not music or something like that. Even music, it gets accelerated, it gets slowed down, and it's a bit like in a scary movie.
Yeah. You actually have Doppler effect when it moves past you?
Yeah. Yeah.
They've implemented Doppler. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
Yeah, we put some spheres and let them rotate around us, and just put some sound on it, and it's it's scary.
Hey, Carl, do you know if there are any scenes right now in the beta that implement sound already?
Yes.
I think there are. Yeah.
Yes. If you go to District X, the western border of it, there's a scene there that's the Kabloon farm from the hackathon.
Do you have coordinates by chance?
I can get it quick.
Oh, sweet.
-75. Oh no, you probably want to come into it more like here or here. So this will be on the road, just to the east of the scene. -73, 56.
Got it.
Well, I mean, you know, I dare you to stand in that scene for an hour and not get tired of the sound. No, I mean, seriously, I've been thinking about the fact that when you're developing some of the sound in it, you're like taking, you're going into it for a few minutes, a minute maybe, look at something, go back out and work on something. But if you go into it for an hour, you're going to be like, oh man, this chewing gum has no flavor anymore. I just got to spit it out somewhere, right? It gets so tiresome. So think about that for people that might want to be in your scene for a while. Can they turn the sound off? Is the volume too loud? Does it not have enough silence from time to time? I mean, really think about how to make a scene enjoyable. I'm going to a little plug for a book that I wrote for at Amazon Kindle Books. You can look for me as an author, or the book's called Sansar Guided. The chapter in there that talks about some of the things that you might want to think about to make a scene enjoyable, to make it more compelling, lighting, sound, stuff like that. So
think about looping a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
Any other questions? Well, this is very enjoyable for me, and I hope you guys are going to be a wonderful team of powerful scene builders. I encourage you to collaborate with each other. There is no such thing as cheating in this course. This is a different educational paradigm where it's okay to look over somebody else's shoulder. In fact, please do. And help each other, develop friendships, do project teams. The last assignment in this course includes so with that, I'm going to call the session to a close and end the meeting. And
thanks a lot, Carl. This was really great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your help and participation, and thank you for all of you who are politely keeping your microphones muted. Hopefully you're hearing well and everything is going well in the course for you. And good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.